This is, I started this yesterday. This is a book. This is really the very, very early inklings of an Orthodox person writing about Reformation. And it's even a question, is this person really, is very different, let's say, than Rabbi Chorin, who's much more of a reformer. This is, sort of in the spirit of change. I don't think we would call him reform. But, obviously the whole point is that at the beginning of all of this, it's really not reform. It's really, this is Orthodox people who are writing about certain kinds of change. What do you call reform? What don't you call reform? Where do you draw the line? Is interesting. Now, I thought what was interesting about the Sidurim I sent yesterday was how much change there was in the Sidurim, because those are pretty early. This is, in 1812, which is this person that we were looking at, there's not a lot of what we would call reform, really. This early reform is extremely traditional. 1820, even Rabbi, Chorin, who I think we would call a Orthodox reformer, or a formerly Orthodox person who is really pushing for reform. I think we have to put that in context. And I think sometimes when we think about reform, we see a reform prayer book that is missing all of these things. We assume that comes with being reform, but I'm not sure that was the case. In other words, in our mind, when we think about reform, we think, no Shabbos, no kosher, no, that's our reform. But even though in 1820 or 1818, the reform siddur is missing all kinds of things. First of all, it's interesting what's still in there. God should bring us back to Zion is in all of those siddurim, the ones I looked at from before 1850. The full Shema is there. Now it's true they leave out, kind of Psukei D'Zimra and other things, but is that because they were doing it and just the Chazan was doing it? Remember, publishing is not so easy.
Did they have korbanot from like Musaf on?
So that Musaf is interesting. They tweak it a little like it's a lot like a conservative prayer book. It was not easy to find. So I had to figure out, I had to search in German eventually. Not that I know German, but I was able to find the siddur from 1845. And that opened up this whole HEC website that had all these different siddur. You can see this? Oops. You can see this, right? This is the 1819 siddur. And this one seems very short, actually. This one is missing, I think, much more. Simcha Yigdal, right, which is Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. Here, Musaf L'Shabbos. You can see this? Yeah. Which obviously, women's issues doesn't enter anybody's mind. So there's no problem, with a traditional beginning here. And this is all pretty standard. Mechaye Meitim Ata, right? It's got Tchira Meitim. It's got, now, there's a lot that's, this is 60, right? There's a lot that's missing here, but I suspect, like, for instance, and the problem is I can't read the German. This is the very beginning, right? It's Friday night. It's missing Kabbalat Shabbat. Now, did they take it out because of time? Did they not take it out and it's just not in the siddur because the Chazan did it? Not exactly sure. And then it's got Shema, it's got the full Shema. And then it like skips to Kaddish. It seems to be missing everything. And then it doesn't even have the Amidah Friday night. So it must be that they're already doing what they said they're doing, which is that there's no silent Amidah. It's maybe just the out loud Amidah. Because you can see now the other possibility is that Friday night they don't have an Amidah because what we have, they have what we have, like Magen Avot, that actually is an Amidah. I mean, that actually is a kind of repetition of Amidah. And they have Kiddush. And then here's Shacharis for Shabbos. And they go right to Yishtabach here. Now, is that because they're doing Psukei de Zimra with instruments altogether? Is there no Psukei de Zimra? This is fairly standard from the beginning of Shacharis. Here you have Shema. And here we have the Amidah. Now, let's see this. Right? Yismach Moshe B'Nascha. Now, in our siddur, it talks about how the non-Jew doesn't have that. Oh, by the way, there's 2 pages missing here, so this is not helpful. But in the 1845 siddur, I noticed that what they did is they tweaked. They didn't want to say, the non-Jew doesn't, lo yishkenu arelim, the uncircumcised don't rest on it. So they changed that. Taking out the Torah. And here's Musaf. Right, so Musaf is normal until we get through Kaddish. And here's what they do. L'Moshe tzivisa b'Har Sinai mitzvah Shabbos zachar v'shamar. You commanded Moses at Har Sinai the mitzvah of remembering keeping the Shabbos. Uvot tzivisanu Hashem Elokeinu lahakriv b'karban musaf Shabbos karei. And there you commanded us the karban musaf. V'chein yehi ratzon lefanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'lkeinu. Therefore, it should be your will, God. You should receive our prayers with mercy. B'makom karbanot chavotenu, in the place of our sacrifice, in the place of the obligation of our sacrifices. Now that's not crazy. I mean, that's exactly what Chazal say, is that the prayers take place in the sacrifices. Tamidim k'sidrum musfim kilchasam, the tamidim and the musafim, the regular sacrifices. V'yas musaf yom haShabbos zeh k'mitzvah sutzanecha, and the musaf of this Shabbos, the musaf offering of this Shabbos, like your will, so what exactly is it saying? Does this last line, we should bring the musaf? I don't think so. I think what they're saying is, you commanded us to bring the musaf, and may it be your will that you should receive our prayers in the place of the musaf offering. I mean, that it doesn't pray to bring back the musaf offering, but what it is saying is not crazy. I mean, it doesn't say to bring back the musaf. Sure talks a lot about Shabbos. This is all the same. So that's the thing. We see a prayer book like this that's missing things. We think, they're not doing anything. They're not keeping Shabbos, not keeping kosher. But that may not have been true. I suspect that wasn't true. And I suspect somebody like Rabbi Chorin is okay with a prayer book like this, although he had told them to keep musaf. What did he say?
It does have the line "V'hashev et ha'avodah l'dvir beitach."
Right, does not have that for sure.
It does have that.
What? You say it does?
It does. In the on the right side, "V'hashev et ha'avodah l'dvir beitach."
You're right. Now, avoda could mean prayer, right? But it is dvir beitacha. It's right. You're right. Oh, v'shei Yisrael u'sfilasam be'avat kabel beratzah. Accept the sacrifices of the Jewish people. So it's exactly the same way we have it, right? Yeah. So it's funny what they change and what they don't. What they don't change is quite surprising. So this is a fairly, in theory, a fairly normative siddur. It's missing some things, but again, it's hard to know if that was just because the Chazan said it and what's here in the German. And they have Rosh Hashanah. So that's, let's look at Musaf in 1845. That is 1819. That's pretty early. But there was a way to go to an earlier text. No, I think I sent the link to you actually. Didn't I send yesterday? I sent a link to these yesterday. Oh, it's not here. Okay, previous manuscript. Here, this is the 1845. Let's look at Musaf in the 1845 version, see if they changed it. This I think is Shabbos. Oh, here we go. The Shul Shalom. Shabbos. Here, Moses the Shabbos. L'Moshe tzivisa al har Sinai mitzvah Shabbos achab shamer uvod tzivisan shemach b'karban Musaf Shabbos kori v'chenu etzon f'necha shalom kenu. So you commanded us the Musaf. B'kabel brach mivatzon avreshes sifasedim ha'gam korbanos chosedim. So that seems very similar. Makom Musaf Yom Shabbos zeh. Slightly different, I think. So they've taken out that paragraph, right? do this in two different windows. So it looks like they took out the paragraph of Vasheva Swavada Vidvir Beitecha. No, I'm sorry. Oh, look what they're here. They put it in parentheses. You see? Right, which was your point. It was very surprising that they had it. They put it in parentheses. So, it's funny because that's exactly how things went with the conservative movement, right? And you look at the conservative movement siddur over time, right? First, it's like extremely traditional. And then it, and then, the mahot or whatever it is, right? The option. And then it becomes, just more liberal. Although I think that the reform movement about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, published a more traditional siddur, like they'd gotten too far. And it was like, so, that there was kind of backlash. And I think that was, so over here, you can see it's moving in that direction. But I have to remember, what is prayer? And as we see prayer as so set in stone, but it's really not. What is prayer? I mean, prayer, in a certain sense, prayer should be the easiest thing to change. For us, it's like this hill people die on because it's so symbolic, because it's public, because we live in a Christian world where prayer is the center, organized prayer is the center of things. But in Judaism, prayer is pretty late. Prayer is rabbinic. Prayer is, in a certain sense, it shouldn't be that hard to change prayer. It's true. The Gemara says that you have to, for a blessing, it has to have a certain structure. But if you don't pray that God should bring back the Musaf offering, instead you say, our prayers are taking the place of the Musaf offering. That's true. I'm not sure that's so problematic. In our own minds, it's such a heresy because it represents being reform, and that means you're not giving Shabbos either. You're not giving kosher either. You're not. In other words, I don't know. In a way, in their minds, there is a radical part of Reform Judaism that emerges pretty quickly in those days, and already, and then soon there's no Shabbos, and they want to get rid of circumcision. That's all very radical. But I think certainly for those who are Orthodox rabbis, and they're becoming reformers, I remember what's our Choron's big issue with prayer? It's that it's a balagan. It's that we want an organ because it's going to dignify prayer. It's a far cry from being a Reformed Jew, in how we picture being a Reformed Jew. I think it's just important to put ourselves in 200-year-old shoes. I think changing prayer may be easier than we imagine if it hadn't become. But a lot of times I say Orthodoxy is what it is today because it lives in reaction to the Reform movement. If there was no Reform movement, we probably find it easier to tweak our own prayers. We put up walls partly because we were resisting the Reform movement. And that's part of it. All right. We'll look a little bit tomorrow, hopefully at this rabbi who was writing very, very early and just inklings of change. And then next week, starting Thursday, I'm going to be away for a week. I'll send you an email about that. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Rabbi.